Welcome everyone to our Spring 2022 series of OTF Connects webinars entitled Supporting Teacher Efficacy and Student Engagement. My name is Peter Beans and I'm honored to be your moderator for today's session with Sandy Kritzer and Jan Haskings-Winner entitled Building Community Through Inquiry and Collaboration in the Secondary History and Civics Classroom. Before we begin, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge we are gathered in the traditional territories of various Indigenous peoples, and we further recognize our duty to support the achievement of the calls to actions stemming from the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. Before we begin, I'd like to welcome Sandy Kritzer and Jan Haskings-Winner. Sandy is the current president of OHASCA, which is the Ontario History, Humanities and Social Science Consultants Association, past president of OHASTA, which is the Ontario History and Social Science Teachers Association, and is a secondary curriculum leader in Upper Grand District School Board. While she currently facilitates teacher learning opportunities in her board, she previously taught history, civics, law, and social science. She is the co-author of civics and social science textbooks. Jan is past president of OHASTA and current treasurer. She is a retired TDSB teacher and currently the principal of International School St. Lucia. She has been a long advocate for building community in her classroom to strengthen the learning process. She is also the co-author of several history and other textbooks. Jan has taught history, economics, law, civics, and social science. So let's turn it over to Sandy and Jan. Welcome.
Thank you.
With that, I will stop sharing.
All right. Well, we're so excited to be working with all of you today. I'll be sharing my screen, but Jan and I will be chatting back and forth, and we're hoping to have a bunch of interactivity today, as well as offer you lots of ideas. We will be sharing a participant version of our slide deck, which has links to pretty much everything we're talking about, which you'll see on our slide deck as well. So that will be posted in the chat at one point as well. So just want to make sure, can everybody see my screen right now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, and I didn't get my screen ready to see that. So anyway, that's just kind of the way it goes, right? So we have a few learning intentions today, which is we're talking about building community. We're going to be talking at first about doing this work within the classroom environment, because as you know, it's been a little bit tough since after the pandemic, that kids coming back, teachers coming back together. How do we use this space again to make connections with one another? And of course, this actually came out of conversations that Jan and I had with teachers about, well, what are the needs of folks right now as you're coming back into this space together? And this is what they were saying. This is what they told us. So, and we were excited because we love talking about building community connections and doing all this interactive work. So we're going to be talking about doing this within the environment of the classroom, as well as through like what you're doing in terms of the learning and the instructional practices that you're doing. So we're hoping that we show lots of examples for how to do this work in this way. Well, and you probably value building community because that's why you're here. But so we want to acknowledge that, and we'll give you lots of chances actually to share some of the things that you have been doing as well in your practice. We're certainly not the keepers of all the knowledge, but we'll give you lots of ideas. But we believe that building community helps to build that trusting relationship amongst students, as well as between students and teachers, which you really need in any classroom. But in history and civics, there's a lot of issues that get discussed. They can be very difficult issues at times, and building that trusting relationship is so important. We want the sense of belonging is really important for kids, and of course the pandemic has not helped that. So, as they come together, this is really important. We put support CRRP, which is culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy. This is not the work of CRRP. I want to make that clear. That work is so crucial in terms of developing high expectations, or, you know, for all students, developing cultural competence and critical consciousness. Those are very specific skill sets and learning that we all need to do. But this work of building community can be part of that work and definitely supports that work. So this is, wanting to make that distinction. Of course, we think that building community does help in co-constructing of knowledge and doing those inquiry-based learning and critical thinking, developing the creativity and problem-solving skills in our kids. So we're hoping that you see that through what we're offering today. Jan?
Okay, so we are looking at how we are going to actually do this in, we're going to start off by modeling, if I'm correct on this one, how we can actually do that in our particular classroom, because it's really important for us to think about all the parts that Sandy just mentioned. So I want to start off with, next slide, please.
I'm trying to go to the next slide and it's not letting me. Oh, there it is.
Okay, oops, okay, all right. So we're at 26, less than 3 of us kind of stuff, right? So that's 23. So that might be a little larger. Sandy and I were very happy to find out how many people signed up for this, but it was more than we were thinking. So what I would like to do, because what I would actually do, because it's really important to start off with who's in your classroom, who's in the group that you're talking about. So so what we wanted to do is have you share your name, your board or institution, and either one question, what's on your refrigerator door, or what's one thing that life is teaching you right now. So since we won't be able to go all the way through and have everybody speak, which is very sad, what I would like you to do is in the chat post. So Sandy, could you model for us, right? Your name, your board or institution, and then share either what's on your refrigerator or something that life is teaching you right now. Okay, so you have to do more than your name. You have to say where you're from, and then something. You have to put all those in one post. Okay, so Sandy, if you want to, you have yours ready to go? There you go, Sandy. Okay, so Sandy has a lovely, awesome example. Okay, because she's put her name, she's how she identifies, which is part of what you do, where she is from, in her case, Upper Grand, and then also what life is teaching her right now. And I think that's as I know her well, that is an appropriate thing for her to make. So if everybody else wants to just post, your name, where you're from. Okay, thank you, Kristen. Okay, Cordo, thank you. Okay. Yes, Cindy, I'm with you on that one.
And Cordo, misinformation on the common good. Wow, what a powerful, thing to start us off with.
Yeah. Oh, wow, 4 TCs from Trent all together. That's awesome. And Wendy's coupons. Wendy's coupons, I love it.
Stay positive.
Okay.
Yes. Lots of family on the fridge.
Yeah. Mine has instructions to dog on the fridge. Mine have, what are the dog cues they need to know, right? So, yes, politics. I have to agree with you on that one, David, in terms of the role of politics in almost everything that's in our life, for sure. All right, so this is a way, if you had time in your classroom, you would actually have, I just pulled, and so the source is something called We and Me. This is not the me to we people and none of that stuff, right? So this is just an organization called We and Me. They have great opportunities for like icebreakers and things like that. So so that is an opportunity for you to kind of think about how to build those community, those relationships, because when kids know who each other is, they're more likely to have those conversations and get into the more difficult conversations beside whether you like, the Raptors or the Blue Jays or whatever kind of stuff, right? So
can I add one point, Jan?
Yes, please.
I taught in a small rural school, and I made an assumption that all the kids knew each other because I was teaching in a small in a rural school. I thought, oh, and actually they didn't all. And so, it doesn't matter where you are, if you're in a big city or a small community, it is so important to take this time.
Okay, moving on. All right. Is this you now, Sandy?
No, that's you, Jan.
Oh, still me? Okay. All right. There's a lot of strategies that you could use in your classroom to make those connections, right? So community circles is a great way. And that what we just did could have been a great community circle. You could have your kids, standing or sitting. If you have ever taught drama, circle is a very important part of drama in terms of how you build those communications and things like that, right? The idea of seating, how kids are positioned in your classroom is really, really important. And you want to sort of move away, we're suggesting away from rows and then into other things, and we're going to come back to this in a minute, right? So move students remove them regularly so they're not in the same quads all year or all semester. So I taught a 10 applied class, and I thought it was the most difficult class I've ever taught in a long time. And but I believed in my quads, I believed in so I would move them, and then that was a non-semester school, and they were starting to talk to each other and actually like each other. Went, oh, this is working. And then they say, but miss, you said we're moving every month. I'm like, oh shoot. I mean, but they're working so well, I didn't want to change them, but I said I would move them every month, and then they would move again. And this was at the end of this time. This class, which was a difficult class at the beginning, was actually a class who actually talked to each other in the hallway, not just in my classroom. And that's why moving them around, not always in the same group all semester, all year matters. And when you're starting them, every time you move them in the new month, give them a quick introduction, because they don't necessarily know each other, or maybe they might have heard the name, but they don't know them very well. So next slide. And so here's two examples. It could be quads, which is my preferred method. Research does say groups of 4 are the best, and you should go to 3 rather than 5 if you have funny numbers and your class doesn't divide by 4. But sometimes pairs are necessary, right? Depending on the nature of your class. So the second picture there is pairs, where students are together. I mean, the challenge with COVID and social distancing and all those kinds of things, right? But quads actually allows a bit more distance than you would expect, because they're actually not that close to each other, as you can see. So this is a really important process when you are, yes, I mean, I actually had one time where I put 2, I start off in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1's here, 2's here, 3's here. I have no idea who's in my class, right? And randomly I put 2 children who were actually by law not allowed to be together. And the principal came immediately to my classroom that lunch and told me I had to move them immediately. Well, no one told me they were not allowed to be together. Why were they in my class at the same time? However, so yes, sometimes we do have challenges, and I mean, when you don't know them well, it is a bit random. And to Pauline's point about, identifying students with special needs, but I actually think it really helps bridge, where students are not, the bluebirds and the cardinals kind of stuff, right? Where we actually work, so kids work with each other. At my school, we have a kid with Down syndrome integrated into the classroom, and he is integrated and he is friends with everybody because he's an important member of our school, as everybody else is, right? So, but it can be a challenge, and I mean, I'm not saying it's an easy challenge, but I would argue that it's an important challenge, right?
Mm-hmm. And talking with the kids, starting with, who their safe people are, and just navigating that, are you ready to meet new people, and working with the students. Absolutely.
Yeah. Sometimes partway through the semester, I'll say, you can pick one person you want to be with, only one. And then I try to honor that request at some point, right? So, okay.
Thank you so much. So then, whoops, I'm having trouble navigating between the chat and that. So when we're talking about then, again, more using the physical space, the actual physical room, I don't know if people still have bulletin boards, but where I taught, there still is bulletin boards or opportunities to put stuff on the wall. Of course, lots of people use the wall for posting student work, which is so important for including student voice. So I don't want to discount that, but it's also can be used as an interactive space. So when we're thinking about the history classroom, one of the suggestions from the Big Six is doing a timeline with attitude, which is that first picture on the left there, which is my kids called it the timeitude. I don't think we go to the timeitude, which is a value line. So you've got the +1, 2, or even 3, the -1, 2, or 3 at the far left. In this case now, in the horizontal line is the timeline, and then you're posting ideas based on, you know, did they have, in this case, a positive influence or negative influence. You can't put anything on the zero, and that forces conversation. Actually, in this case, this was a 4U, Chai 4U, and we were learning about Enlightenment thinkers, and we would go back to the timeitude and actually sometimes rethink where previous people had, and then we changed them. So it actually was a really good collaborative conversation in the classroom, and kids totally got into it. In fact, you can see they went and changed my timeline. It said Enlightenment timeline, but then they changed it. Anyway, in their participant copy, you can click on that. What I've done is done a search for you and there are lots of other timelines with attitude examples for you to see. So, and I love that there's some suggestions for, yeah, picking out of a hat or for seating. Oh, I guess these were from the seating plan, and I would give them slips of paper. Awesome. Okay, thank you for those. I just want to make sure I didn't forget anything. Another suggestion, whoops, sorry. I was opening and closing the chat there, is to do things like, I think a lot of people do like 4 corners activities and things like that. U-shaped discussion is one of my favorites. I've shared with you a digital copy because I was supporting folks in my board. You know, how do you do stuff that used to be done physically or movement oriented? How do you do that in a digital space? So during the pandemic, so I've offered that as an example. For those who are not familiar with that, you post a question or an issue where there are generally 2 opposing viewpoints, and then kids physically stand in a U, and the 2 tips of the U represent the 2 absolute opposition, and then they stand sort of closer to the middle based on, well, I'm not so sure. And then as you have a discussion, kids can move, they can shift along the U, which physically represents the change in their thinking. Point on this one, when I removed myself from the middle of the U and stood outside of the U, I found those discussions went a lot more smoothly. Like the kids actually just started doing those discussions without waiting for me to say, okay, this student speak, now this student. Normally you kind of just started off from the 2 ends, and then, you know, hear the different perspectives, maybe hear from someone in the middle, and then the discussion just starts. So if you do that, I recommend removing yourself from the center, and that way it actually physically centers student voice as well. We have other movement ideas as well, which we'll do in a bit, but we've been doing lots of talking so far, and we wanted to give you a chance to add your ideas, and we've already had a bunch of ideas, which is great. So if you, did I already have the participant copy? Has that been posted in the chat? Okay, so if you open your participant copy, you can click on that Jamboard symbol, but we can also put the Jamboard link in the chat as well for you. So there's 2 ways for you to go in there, and please only stick to frame 1. So when you open it, this is what you will see. In what ways do you build community in your classroom? And we're just asking for you for those kind of physical things that we're talking about so far. Does that make sense? Okay, and the link's been put in again. And it should be open for anyone who has the link to edit. For those who might not be familiar with Jamboard, I think a lot of people are, but not everybody has a Google Apps board. There's a section along the left-hand side, and the first, second, third, fourth option down, it looks like a piece of paper. If you click on that, that's a sticky note, and you can change the color. You can do what you want, but that's a great one to use to post. So we'll give you a couple of minutes to share your ideas now. Thank you so much.
Sandy, can you put the link to the Jamboard in the chat as well, just so they can go directly there?
Sure,
or
I will
Peter
do
or something.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can do that. But the link from the slideshow is a view only Jamboard.
Right. So they need to go to The Jamboard is only view only? Okay.
Yes.
Oh, I have it set. I just looked at it and
Oh,
it says,
the U one? Maybe I shared the wrong one.
yeah,
It's not the U one, it's the J, it's the,
yeah, the
okay.
U is the U-shaped discussion. It's the yellow J. So I put it in the chat now. Thanks so much, everyone, for helping us through that. Really appreciate that.
okay.
I can't wait to hear the suggestions. And this, like what we're trying to do also, and it's kind of, the irony is not lost on us that we're talking about physical relationship in the classroom and we're doing it digitally. So
Yes.
Anyway, thanks for playing along with that aspect.
The advantage, though, is we have people as far away as Attawapiskat and St. Lucia in the same meeting, and that could never have happened if we were in person.
Absolutely.
Because budgets are zero for travel right now, right? So we'll just look at the positive side, Sandy, in terms of.
I love those get to know you activities. Yeah, it's so great. And when I switch up groups, I often ask kids, okay, find one thing you have in common, or everyone share your favorite, whatever, right? And so and I try to change it up every time they move groups, and that way they're always kind of learning something different. When before I did that, I mean, I had good discussions, but the difference in my classroom culture and feeling of togetherness really changed and I did those groups with, well, I taught history and civics. So grade 10 up to grade 12, it didn't matter what age group we were in. Lore organization games. Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah. That's a great, yeah. And sometimes like, people think, well, it's a game, and okay, you play a game that takes just a few minutes out of your day and it makes a huge difference to the class. So thanks very much. The who am I? Yeah, artifacts. Oh, that's wonderful. And you can do that in history too. Sometimes when I'm teaching about artifacts, then I bring in a box with a bunch of artifacts, and they're really from either my house or a relative's house or something. And I say, what do you know about this person based on the artifacts that we see here? So they can get to know you as well, or maybe they bring in artifacts from them. Daily dedications, and thank you so much for that YouTube clip. Love that we can get lots of ideas from elsewhere as well. Round the room timeline. Ooh, that's a great way to use the physical space as well. Oh yeah, a collaboration space where kids can introduce themselves, talk, play pictures. Love it. Yeah. So there's lots of different ways to get to know one another. And you're welcome to keep posting here, but I think we'll just keep moving for now. But thank you so much for sharing. And as I said, just keep going as we continue to go through our learning together. So our next section is really how might we build community through the instructional practices and the curriculum. And we've already sort of done some instructional practices already, but really wanting to get deeper into the curriculum, into inquiry activities and so on. So one of the first things that Jan and I we're total protocol people, is using protocols. And for those who are not familiar with that language, it's not like the protocol in the meaning of like, this is what you do when there's a fire drill, like not that protocol, but protocol in terms of having structure for conversations. Protocols allow everyone to have voice, and sometimes that voice doesn't mean they've said something. Maybe based on the protocol, it might be where they stand to show their thinking, or what they've written, or what they've drawn. So, but it also allows thinking time. It also values and centers student voice. So all of those things are really important. We've included a few here, but there's so many more out there, and we can't wait to hear in the next section some of your ideas. So placemats are, oldie but a goodie, right? These can be physical, newsprint. It could be in a digital space. It doesn't matter as long as they're working on it together. I actually, as much as, and I think especially recently, as digital as we've become, sometimes it's just nice to get out some markers and have a physical space. The Frere model is really good for building vocabulary. So I've given you a link to that. One that I really like that's more history specific would be something like this. And I've shared a digital one with you, the cause and consequence analysis triangle. So this is where you might ask a question. In this case, I've taken this from the 4U class. What was the most significant cause of the Reformation? And they have, you see here, I've got individuals, groups, and society. And beside each of those, students would write details that they're aware of. And then eventually, once they've talked through all of the things that they know, and lots would be listed there, all of the impacts on the Reformation, causing the Reformation, then they would put the star next to, and I love this because it's not just along a line, right? It's this star goes, it allows a more nuanced conversation. It's not wholly individuals, it's not wholly groups, maybe it's totally in the middle, maybe it's somewhere here. So kids can really have more of a nuanced explanation for what they're trying to say, and then they can detail their explanation in and write it down, or maybe they present it. This is great to do in groups, especially as you're building understanding, but you can also use this as assessment for learning, assessment as learning. So this is a wonderful way to show thinking visibly, as well as get kids talking. Reading protocols are another great way, because just giving kids like, read this article, read this primary source, whatever, and say what you think, that can work. But a reading protocol really helps kids chunk through it in a way that also integrates thinking. One excellent source for lots of those is the Adolescent Literacy Guide, Facilitator's Guide, which is linked in there for you. A Say Something activity is also there. I've used that with all ages of kids in secondary. It's just especially if the text is just that little bit more challenging. And that way they read a chunk, everybody says something, whether they ask a question, make a connection, make a comment, they're just short. And then they continue, they read the next section together and they do the same thing. So it's a way to really chunk that reading and to give them a chance to interact with it together in a small group, usually groups of 3. So these are some examples of many ways of having conversation-based protocols. Jan?
All right, and I just want to, just before we jump to that one, and Sandy, I don't know how we missed this one, but Facing History and Ourselves has a really good resources, and I've just put it in the chat, and one is called Big Paper. So when you want to have a conversation about a difficult subject, right? It's a really safe way to have a conversation where students just, and it's kind of like the old-fashioned, like it's like they're texting, but so they move around and they're writing their responses to prompts and things like that. And then it's a safe way to have a conversation of difficult topics, because history often has difficult topics in civics, right? And then when you've had that safe space, then you can move into like a class discussion kind of stuff, right? So it's not this, we wouldn't necessarily do that on causes of World War I, because it's not really, it's not really gripping. But when you want to get into some of those more complicated, serious issues that we grapple with in history and civics classes, I highly recommend that. Okay, moving on. So another protocol is something called the ICQ, or Interesting Connections and Questions. And so you might want to start off with something, again, a quote, right? And we have Jean Augustine here. Sandy and I were brainstorming this, and I was saying, Jean, what's her name? And then I typed it into Google, and it came up with Jean Augustine. I had not even finished the thought yet. My computer is listening to me, actually, right? What
you're thinking.
It does. So, so this will be a strategy where you could actually, you can pick anything that you want, right? I mean, in terms of what you want to use as your link, as your mind's on, or wherever you are in that process kind of stuff, right? So, and this works especially well with a longer text. So if you want kids to read a longer text, which we do want to do with you, obviously, and get them to highlight what do they find interesting, what connections can they make, and what questions can they have. You can do that in small groups first, and then you have a really deep, large group discussion because they've really thought deeply about whatever it is you want them to read. And of course, in history class, we're often looking at primary sources, and that's not something you can do simply. You have to think about it really deeply and look at it and understand it. And some of the older texts, depending on the course, are even more dense than, you know, more contemporary civics type things. But and depending on the learners in your class, right? We've talked about different learners and things like that. So these strategies, these protocols also support learners in wherever they are in that capacity, because kids will always be able to find something that's interesting in what they have read, right? And make a connection either to themselves or to something that's happened before or something that's happening today, right? So in that kind of history classroom, you're always looking at, and I just say that a history teacher at my school, we're talking about the Oscars and what happened, and she used cause and consequence as the frame to help her students have a really thoughtful, interesting conversation about what happened at the Oscars in terms of the infamous slap kind of stuff, right? So, and I was so proud of her, you know, that she was doing those historical thinking concepts with contemporary issues and really getting kids to think deeply about it. So these are ways you can do that. The protocols, you know, we're assuming with the historical thinking concepts and the political thinking concepts and so on, right? So,
well, Jan, we're good on time if we can actually do this protocol with the group.
Okay, that is even better. Okay, so in the chat, if you could think of just from that quote we have there, right? What's something you find interesting? What connections you want to make, or what questions do you have? And Jean Augustine is the former first Black woman elected to the House of Commons, and she was also a big advocate for what's actually Black History Month. I mean, we didn't put that in there, but that was also she was really instrumental in getting Black History Month part of what we actually acknowledge in Canada, right? So,
absolutely.
So if somebody wants to,
round one would be what's interesting.
Yeah.
And
so you can just put I, you don't have to write the whole word, but put I, and then something that you find interesting. And then what, C, connection, and then Q, a question you have. Are you all thinking? Oh, thank you, Todd. Interesting. Anybody else? Maybe they want to go to connections or questions. Interesting, Nancy. Thank you. Yes, good, Todd.
already we've dug into such thoughtful we've only heard from a couple of people so far, so you can see how you can get really deep and make really meaningful connections with a very simple reading protocol.
Yeah. And if you had a longer, which you would normally do in most classes, you would actually have lots of opportunities to do, you know, the all three parts of that kind of stuff, right? So we're just sort of like that. This ICQ is one of the protocols that's there, right? So
yeah, we just
yeah, and that's the big question that you ask Todd. You know, how do we do this kind of stuff, right? You know, so as we're always you know, struggling with these things and the diversity of our classroom, right? In 21st century, well, Canada, Ontario, wherever you are from all over the world, right? So, okay.
All right, well, thank you so much for participating in that discussion. So we'll move on to the next part that Jan is going to walk you through.
Okay. So one of my favorite things about teaching in Canadian World Studies and social science is the idea that you can actually like have simulations, right? So one of the things, both Sandy and I have done this in the grade 12 world history course, right? And this is a salon where we actually have students come enroll as one of the different philosophers sort of in the Enlightenment time, and they're actually debating whether or not it was an enlightened time or not, because it really depended on who you were, and whether it was enlightened or not. And then I would also have them do a potluck. So it was always great when my class was before lunch, because that was like lunchtime kind of stuff, right? And we had a variety of less authentic snacks like cheesies to go with our, you know, something slightly more. And I would bring wine, which was grape juice, and you know, that looked like wine, but it was different colors of grape juice. And I would actually buy like plastic wine glasses, not the real thing, right? So it was actually a really authentic opportunity for kids to talk about ideas and the ideas of that particular time, right? So some of you might be familiar with heritage fairs. This is especially popular and used and up to grade 8, and they're still going on. I think they've been virtual for the last little bit. I've been privileged to be a chief judge at some local ones, and it's absolutely mind-boggling what the kids will do in sharing their ideas and things like that. So the heritage fairs are a great way to do authentic history, what I like to call doing history, as a, you know, I mean, not that they don't need to read occasionally and write, but sometimes the doing is also important, right? I've been really trying to figure out how to do a grade 10 heritage fair. I never quite got it together. There's a teacher at Leaside Collegiate in Toronto who has since retired, and she did it she had a huge school and every grade 10 kid did it. But that's unique to Ontario. And then on the civic side, you're probably familiar with student vote whenever time there's an election, and hopefully you participate in that. It's always very exciting to see how closely or not the students reflect what happened actually. And I remember in the 2015 election, when Trudeau II won, and I saw our student vote, and it was like, because of course he wasn't considered to be a strong contender at the time, right? And our kids all voted him in. I went, wow, because you get to see it the night before, but you can't speak about it, right? And then when the actual results came in, it was like the kids are predicting what's going on. Actually, it's quite powerful, right? There's civics. A city council disposition is where you can actually have kids pick an issue, and I mean, even go and actually present to city council about issues in your community and see if they will actually deal with it. You can do a simulation of it, or you can do it in real time, right? There's links here for a trustee simulation. So OHASTA had a very small partnership, a project with the Ministry of Education to develop some resources to support trustees. Because everybody doesn't, you know, we have federal and provincial and even sometimes municipal, but we don't have the, you know, those poor trustees get ignored, right? So, and there are also student trustees as well. So there's a little simulation you can do there. And the bigger resources beside that, where you can have access to all of the things that were created. And then the last thing is, especially in civics, but I mean, my example of the history teacher and dealing with the Oscars is valid, right? Where you can actually have kids go around once around and be responsible for something in the news and leading a class discussion as a formative, as a task. And then the second time round, they are leading it. And that's that's assessment of learning in terms of looking at political thinking and current events and, civic action and things like that. Right. So,
Jan,
yep.
Cindy asks if anyone has done a city council deposition. I would love to learn how to approach this. So is that something you want to talk more about now, or might you want Cindy to email you?
She could probably email me. And I have a very good friend who does it twice a semester, because it's of course 2 civics classes, right? And then sometimes 4 times a year, times how many years she's been teaching civics. She's an interesting teacher who went into teaching later in life for the sole purpose of teaching civics. That was why she wanted to be a teacher, was to teach civics. And I worked with her on the project about the city council disposition. And the current events activity as well is a really great, my teacher here did it, my civics teacher did it, really getting kids to pay attention to the news, because like now, how can we not know what's going on in the world and be informed, right? So, but I think it's a great way to do that. We also mentioned link to YPI, if you're not familiar with that, Youth Philanthropy Initiative, and they give away real money, actual real cash, and kids actually get to identify which nonprofit organization is most deserving. They do the research. They have to go and talk to them. They can't just Google, charities in my neighborhood kind of stuff, right? And it's the presentations are amazing when kids get to do that. Yes, COVID has done a lot of things, unfortunately, but I'm hoping eventually COVID will end. Not at the rate we're going, but it will. This too will pass. Believe me, this too will pass, right? So
yes. All right. Well, thank you. And so Jan, you can put your email out to, I don't know how you want to share your email, but just don't forget to do that.
Okay. And we're also on Twitter. Sandy and I, we should have put that in our thing, Sandy.
I know, we should have.
Yes, oh, well. we have slipped. I'm on Twitter because of Sandy. It's all her fault.
Yes, I created a monster. All right, so glad that you enjoyed those the authentic experiences. So I mentioned at the beginning that we would talk more about movement, and this is where you can use movement when you're deepening thinking and understanding and talking about concepts. So 2 examples of paired verbal fluency are where you do it in 2 lines, or you can do inside outside circles, and I've linked in how to do that. But essentially what it is you have 3 questions that you'd like the kids to talk about, they pair up. They either stand across from one another in a great big line, or sometimes my classroom wasn't big enough for a straight line, so it would just kind of curve, or you can do it in circles. They get a timed amount of time to talk about something. Usually you start off with, when you have 3 questions or 3 ideas, the first one is the easiest one, or the one that's kind of the more general one, and you go from general to specific, or easier to more difficult, like that sort of thing, to get them into it. They're named partner A or B or 1 or 2 or whatever you want to say. One person gets to talk for a specified amount of time, like 30 seconds, 45 seconds. You kind of have to play with that in terms of how much time you think they need. And then the other person just listens. And then the other person gets to say what they want to say on that topic for that same amount of time. Then they rotate. So maybe you say, okay, partner A, you're going to move down 2 spaces. And so they have to talk to somebody else. There's another statement or question, usually with, it might be a slightly shorter amount of time because it's probably a little more difficult. And then maybe the other person starts, and so on. So it's not like a full conversation. They have to listen to the other person, and they get a chance to say what they'd like. They have a specified amount of time. They don't have to speak for the whole time. Then they switch again, so they get to talk to somebody else. So I like doing something like that. Maybe if we've had, we learned a lot, like something like it was just a huge thing the day before. I really want them to have had a chance to think through it, like for the evening, and then we come back the next day, and at the beginning, we get a chance to do that. Or maybe they had some homework and I want to give them a chance to talk about it. And this is a great way, actually, like maybe not all students have had a chance to do homework. Maybe some of them work jobs and they couldn't, that, you know, there's lots of reasons why that doesn't happen. And so they get a chance to learn a little bit from the others without being like outed publicly. And you can always have a different chat with those students who don't contribute very much later, but at least they've had a chance to talk with others. So I really love paired verbal fluency, and it gets them up and moving, which doesn't, you know, in history and civics, sometimes it's a little more difficult to do that because they're not like phys ed classes and stuff. Scrambled sentences, also one I love very much. This one I use when we've done some learning and I want to consolidate it and I want to check for understanding. So you can do it maybe halfway through the unit or at the end of a really important lesson or something like that. And they write down, kids write down 4 words, and then they move around the room and you say stop. And they just group together with 4 people. So there's a group of 4. So whoever's near them, they share the words that they talked about. Oh, actually, sorry. The kids say 1 word. That's it. They write down 1 word, but that summarizes what they just learned. And they share each word. So hopefully they have 4 words. If they don't, then they just make another one so that they do have 4 words. Like if a couple people had the same word. And then now that they have 4 words, then they make a sentence. Then they have to create a sentence where including all 4 words, and then they have to present their sentence, and they have to do something interesting during those words. Like they might do jazz hands every time they say one of those 4 words, or they might all pop up, or whatever it is. They get to kind of be creative. You do that in a circle so everybody gets to hear their sentences. You get a chance to check for understanding, or have they grasp all the concepts? Do they really understand the main points? Or if there's something like nobody mentioned, now you know what you have to teach more of the next day. So it's a great assessment as learning strategy, and they get to connect with other people in the room. Graffiti wall, I think that's a little more common, and we've offered an example from Facing History there, where you have statements or pictures up and they get a chance to interact. Sometimes I do that at the beginning of a topic. I've done that in civics actually a bunch, as well as in history, where they get a chance to interact with what they know so far. So really, it's a great chance to get some student voice, some valuing student knowledge and experience, and starting from there. And then you get a chance to see where there are gaps and where they're really strong.
Sandy, Cindy asked about example of a question that you would start with, I think.
For paired verbal fluency, yeah. Honestly, it kind of has to do with like whatever topic you've done. Like, let me think about this for a moment. So if I did it based on this presentation, I might say, what's something that really stood out for you from today's presentation? So that's really broad, it's really general, it gives you multiple entry points. Everyone can think of something that stood out for them. And then I would go deeper into something a little more detailed in terms of maybe impact of something you've tried or whatever. Does that help you envision paired verbal fluency, Cindy? And you have links to how to do it. So anyway, so those strategies will help you through that. Okay, so I hope that helped. So those are a whole bunch. We've thrown a lot at you. We can help ourselves. We also wanted to make sure to link to lots of different organizations that support history and civics teaching. So we hope you have noticed that. And sometimes it's like, oh yeah, I forgot about them. So it's not to say that nobody here knew any of those. It's more like, don't forget. And there's some great stuff. So now we'd like to hear from you again. And again, ideally, we would love to just have an open conversation. And of course, if anyone is feeling really strongly that they would rather talk, by all means, you have that opportunity. But at this point, also, we'd love to get you to share your ideas now in frame 2 and frame 3. So frame 2 of the Jamboard, what movement strategies do you use to build community? And then frame 3 is just a free-for-all, like what other stuff have you been really dying to tell us about that you haven't had a chance to share already? And I see a lot of you stayed in the Jamboard, which is great. So we'll just see what comes up. But by all means, if you would prefer to, if you would like to say something out loud, the floor is yours. But we can't wait to hear some of your suggestions that you have to make. And some people actually have been posting some in the chat, so feel free to copy that chat comment and post it in here. You'll have this for later, so you'll be able to go back to this this Jamboard as a refresher for yourself. So you get to hear, you'll have the participant slide deck as well as the knowledge of those in the room, so to go back to your classrooms tomorrow.
Yes, hello. I had a question. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, because I'm walking outside. My question is that I have a grade 8 class teaching history. And how do you deal with the students, like when you ask them questions, they have difficulty analyzing or giving answers. Most of them don't participate. How do you encourage that?
Oh.
Because a lot of them don't have background knowledge. So how do you build that? And how do you get them to participate in class when you ask the questions? Because that's what we're finding in, well, especially in the French. Well, I'm a French teacher. I teach in the French Catholic. Yes, and it's really difficult.
I think Jan and I will both have ideas. If you don't mind, Jan, I'll start and then I'll turn it over to you. So one thing is, rather than having a lot of Socratic discussions, what I tended to do was offer some knowledge, some basic way for everyone to gather that knowledge, whether, and sometimes you can have multiple entry points, like offer a reading, a video, maybe there's images that they can analyze. So there's anyone can go into that space. And then when you're asking questions based on that background knowledge, the first thing I like to do is do a turn and talk first before I expect an answer. So give kids a chance to turn and talk to somebody next to them. And especially since I had them groups, that maybe it's just paired turn and talk, maybe it's with the group. And when you say, okay, you're going to do a turn on talk on this question, I would like to hear from one person from every group or whatever it is. You don't have to do that all the time, but giving kids a chance to turn and talk gives them that chance to kind of try out what they want to say. And if they're not sure, at least they can build knowledge together. Jan?
I say some of these protocols really help that as well, right? So if you give them a small text, like the ICQ, I mean, and there's lots of links. We just picked that one as a sample. There's many, right? You know, so even the one say something, and the other, like there's lots in there. So give kids a text, like a small text. By text, I don't mean the textbook, although there's nothing wrong with that. But what I mean is a writing, is a piece of writing that they're going to read to help build knowledge, right? And understanding. And then once they have that bit of background, then use, the ICQ or any of the other sort of strategies, the paired verbal fluency, all of those things allow for building that comfort level. So then when you actually get to, and it could be, the text could be a video clip as well, right? A heritage moment, or in the case of the Oscars this week, but whatever it is, like there's lots of, there's many videos that you could use as well as your text, right? So they have that common understanding of the whatever it is, right? And then use that to build that for the conversation and the discussion. And again, the smaller groups as well first. So then you can have, the opportunities to kind of have, oh, can someone explain that by the seat of your pants? I'm not familiar with that one.
I know, I was like, woo, what's that one? But first was whoever was asking that question, do you feel like you got an answer to your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, good. Okay.
So let's hear about the exploring by the seat of your pants. If that person—
Can you hear me?
Okay, yes.
It's a group that was started by a teacher, and they've partnered with most scientific organizations around the world. It's not just North America. And then they do virtual field trips to different places. So being science-based, some of them are Parks Canada, Toucan Rescue in another country, Ripley's Aquarium. Those are just some of my favorite ones. But the other day it was Cuddles for Cancer, and it was this girl talking about how she made blankets for people that were recovering from cancer when she was like in grade 4. And then it took off and she has a business, and now she's in university studying e-commerce and stuff. I find a lot of them relate to civics because they're all doing things that are benefiting something.
Make a difference, basically, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just
So
thinking
like
that.
all of these presentations are free, but they do accept donations because I think they work largely off donation or grants. And they just want you to register so that they know how many people are attending. And then you can sign up for a camera spot. And then if all of your students have signed the paperwork, then you can have it project onto the class. So the first 20 minutes or so is presentation. The second 20 minutes is Q&A. And then they throw in the odd Kahoot.
Thank you so much. This is why we love doing this and
Yes.
building from the knowledge in the room. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Looks like we've got a few other ideas for movement strategies as well. Having debates where they have to move to different sides of the room. It looks like if you're doing research projects where they get to move around and see each other's displays. That sounds, building on the Heritage Fair idea and things like that. So thank you so much for sharing your wonderful ideas. You will have access to this after this slide deck or this presentation. So if you do think of something, you're like, ooh, I should have added this, by all means, you're all a learning community now. So, so there you go. I see in the chat, there's also lots of resources in the digital human library. Yeah. Absolutely. And this is the thing, like in history and civics, like there's so much that we can lean on. So really appreciate everyone's sharing. We'll wrap it up shortly, but we wanted to give you also links to the organizations that we represent. I do want to mention that the OHH SSCA website is not great right now, but we are working on it. So I would say don't worry about that website right now. Go to the OHASTA one for now, but we are working on that Consultants Association one.
And OHASTA does have a really, it does have an amazing website. Sandy also sits on the OHASTA board, so I can say that in confidence. But we've done a really amazing job to update the website. There are amazing resources and things like that, right? So, and you just have to Google OHASTA and you'll come to the website. They also do a conference which I think is going to be in November next year. Maybe in person, maybe online. Who knows? Who knows these things, right? But certainly it was something to look forward to there. But the resources are all amazing. And some of the things I talked about, like that trustee project one, for example, will live there. And we're about to, I'm not sure if you're aware that Civics is about to be revised again. And OHASTA just got a contract today, Sandy, to work on some resources to support the Civics, the revised Civics curriculum that's coming to you in time for September. So look out for some things that OHASTA will be doing to help teachers for the new Civics curriculum that is coming. This next very soon.
Absolutely, yeah.
So.
And I was going to say, because there was that teacher who mentioned they taught French. It says OHASA Asho because there's also the French History Association as well. So they try to offer materials in French. Vanessa sorry.
Yeah, it's right. And these new civics resources will be both English and French and AOD compliant and right, so just so you can be, for the new stuff, because for those who teach civics, it's coming, it's changing again. So we have the most changed curriculum in Ontario. Can you put the link in?
Yes. Yeah, Vanessa's posted an idea from Samantha Cottrell. Yeah, she's been doing a ton of amazing work in history. So that's 5:30. So we want to wrap this up. Thank you so much for sharing. Really appreciate everyone being here. Peter, is there anything that you would like to say at this point?
Yeah, I have some closing slides.
Okay. So stop sharing, Sandy.
Stop sharing. There.
Okay. And I will share my screen. Okay, first, thank you so much. It's I found it kind of interesting that the title focused on history and civics. Yet as I was thinking about this, because I don't teach history or civics, I was thinking about all the other areas where many of these techniques could apply. And the whole ICQ thing, like I'm one of the early people on the internet, and ICQ was one of the original messaging services. So every time you kept saying, I thought, oh, I'm in. But no, it's so good. And there was the one question that came up about like, how do you engage some students? And even ICQ would be good for that, because then you're not forcing them to ask a question or say something specific. You're giving them options, right? So they don't necessarily have to ask a question, but just, what was interesting in there, or is there any way that it relates to you, right? Which I found very interesting. So anyway, probably tomorrow, I would imagine you're going to receive a link to an evaluation form, as well as in just a second, I'm going to drop it into the chat window. And you'll also receive, I'm going to take the chat itself and I'm going to condense it. So I'm going to remove all the private information and names and things like that. And, all the links that we've supplied. So I'm going to condense all that and forward that to OTF as well. So that'll be sent out as well. And this recording, you'll get a link to the recording. It'll be an edited version, so we'll trim out like the beginning and the end. And anyway, so all right. So let me now just gonna grab the link and drop it in the chat. So if you want to, before you leave, go ahead and open that in another tab, and then we would appreciate if you could give us your feedback. Perhaps, before you sign out. And then lastly, this is the third of approximately 10 webinars. The next one is Tuesday, Strategies for Student Ownership of Learning, part 1 of 2. And there's the link if you want to register, or even if you just want to look at the calendar for the other events that are coming up. So I'm dropping that in right now. And that would be it. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming. We appreciate it. And thanks so much to the presenters.
And I just want to say, I think, this is our third school year of pandemic teaching, where kids have not been in person for the whole year. And teaching kids how to have conversations with other humans, I think, is what motivated us to do this webinar. That it's important to have those, to teach kids, reteach kids how to actually have, respectful and kind conversations with each other about topics that matter. And raptors matter too, but other things are equally important. So anyway, thank you all for spending your afternoon, an hour with us this afternoon. So